Introducing information into a society that is information poor can be very dramatic. I was in Logar province in Afghanistan when we dedicated a new radio station, the first radio station they had ever had in that province. Now they're coming out of years of being ruled by the Taliban, and the Taliban would cut off the hands of anyone who listened to the radio or who listened even to music. Picture this scene under a big tent with all these, in the middle of this kind of desert area, in an area that was protected by all these soldiers carrying AK-47 rifles and Kalashnikovs, and the tribal chiefs and the generals were all there, and the imams, and we were dedicating this radio station. And I looked over and I watched a group of like 14-year-old boys, and they were holding up a radio to their ears. And I realized that not only were they listening to the first radio broadcasts that they had ever heard, they were listening to the first music they had ever heard. And I just suddenly in that instant realized the power of what we were doing. And that's happening all over the world, and it's very gratifying when we can do that.
I was in Afghanistan a few months ago visiting our project there, and I met with the journalists who are working front and center to provide quality news for their communities. And they're working under very difficult security situations. The security situation has just been getting worse and worse in Afghanistan, and they're working in a very complex political environment. 3 of our stations that we founded in Afghanistan have been attacked by the Taliban. 2 were burned to the ground. A 3rd was attacked by rocket-propelled grenades. And so the journalists who are doing this work are really putting their lives on the line.
It is very dangerous work. We have people in the tribal areas of Pakistan broadcasting programs about women in the area where Osama bin Laden is hiding out, and so it's obviously very dangerous for them. And we've recently had some station managers who were killed there, and it's extremely dangerous work at times. And people risk their lives to try to get information to people that they need. And these are people who live in these communities often, and they know how important it is, and they take these risks knowingly because it's the difference between freedom and not freedom. So they do it, and they're very brave, and we're always in awe of their courage.
Another project that's very exciting to me is our Local Voices project to improve reporting on health journalism. Working in Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, and particularly on the subject of HIV, Internews works really intensively with journalists who have shown an interest in covering health issues. The basic level of understanding of HIV is fairly low in a lot of these countries. The myths can often outstrip reality. There's a myth that if you drink donkey milk, you won't get HIV. There's a myth that if you sleep with a virgin, you will be cured of AIDS. So you can imagine how sad that is. There's also the problem that reporters in these countries are underpaid, they're undereducated, they're overstretched. In Kenya, for instance, many reporters don't have their own computer or even their own phone. They don't have transportation, so they can't do stories outside the capital. They don't have their own equipment. There might be one mini disc recorder for the entire station that they've got to share. Internews has gone in and worked intensely with 1,000 journalists so far to train and mentor them in the process of improving the quality and the effectiveness of their reporting on HIV. And in our trainings, we always take people to either a home for orphans, HIV orphans, or a testing center, or a hospital, some place where they actually meet people who are openly HIV positive, and where they can get firsthand interviews that can put a human face on the epidemic. And we also have media resource centers in Kenya, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, where journalists can come and actually edit their stories and get professional help to make sure that they're of high technical quality. And a wonderful side effect of all this is that because the stories are of such high quality, they're increasing listenership, and therefore the stations are willing to offer more and more airtime for these journalists, and therefore stories that previously had been really underreported or reported in a very sensationalistic and inaccurate way are now actually getting airtime and really changing people's understanding of how HIV works.
At Internews, the two things that I'm most proud of, the first one being the space bridges, the satellite television links that we did between the Soviet Union and the United States, because they reach hundreds of millions of people, and I know that they had a real impact in helping to end the Cold War. To contribute to something that important on such a scale was just was something I'm very proud of. The other thing I think I was most moved by was, while we watched the evening news for years during the siege of Sarajevo, and I felt so impotent and unable to do anything about it. After the war ended in Yugoslavia, and the war crimes trial was about to start, I suddenly had this idea, this realization that people who had suffered so much during the war in Bosnia would never get to see justice being done, and that there would never be any reconciliation between those sides until people had felt that justice had been done. And so holding this trial in The Hague without anybody who was affected by the war seeing it would not be a waste of time, but would not really reach the potential that it had to heal the wounds of that war. And so within a few days, we were able to raise the money and assemble a team and broadcast from The Hague, from the tribunal, live coverage, 9 hours a day of live coverage of the first war crimes tribunal, first war crimes trial. And it went back and it was broadcast by every single station in Bosnia. So all day long, no matter what channel you turned to, they were watching our coverage of the war crimes tribunal. And I know from talking to people there who would tell me that if they went out shopping, they always made sure that one family member stayed home to watch what had happened. It was so important in their lives. When that first came on, I remember just walking outside a few minutes after the broadcast started, and I just broke down and started weeping. So that was for me probably my proudest moment at Internews. But there have been so many.
My philosophy of work is right here on my bulletin board. It's a card that says, "Work is love made visible." I believe that when we are in our truth and we are following our passion, then we are as effective as we possibly can be in making change in the world. And that can happen whether you're just doing your best job as a mother, as a parent, or whether you're a teacher, whether you are providing the most competent and compassionate cashier service you can, or whether you are in a position to work for a nonprofit and to make social change on a global scale. It really comes down to being in your truth.
What I tell anyone who wants to help change the world, and by the way, I believe most people would like to do that if they thought they had the opportunity, and they do. And it's the same thing I tell my children all the time, is just don't compromise with your values and with yourself. Just really trust in moving toward what inspires you. Don't think about the money. You'll always survive. Think about what really turns you on and go for it. I've never known anyone who truly went after their dream who didn't get there. I honestly believe that will work for anyone who doesn't compromise and goes for what their real passion is. Whatever that is, to be an artist, to be a businessman, to run a nonprofit organization, whatever that is, if you really trust your passion and go for it, and don't look back. As Bob Dylan says, you know, she's an artist, she don't look back. Well, that's what you got to do, and it works.
Funding for North Coast Visionaries was provided by a community outreach grant from Frontline World. Funding for the Frontline World Social Entrepreneur Series and educational outreach is provided by the PBS Foundation through a grant from the Skoll Foundation.